I'm Alena Jabarine. I'm a German-Palestinian journalist. I live in Ramallah, and this is my story. I'm half German, half Palestinian. I was born and raised in Germany. This is where I grew up, where I went to school, where I studied politics, and also where I was trained to become a journalist. But Palestine always played a very decisive role in my life, I would say. Every summer we would come to Palestine to visit family, but it was mostly, going to the beach, going to the pool, visiting grandmother. It was less of a political thing. And, as a family, we always used to call it Palestine, even though my family all live in Israel. It was only later when I realized that, this was not only my second homeland or the place where my grandmother lived. This was also maybe one of the most contested and very political places of the world. I think journalism, I hope, for many journalists is more than a job. It's a passion. It's something that really is deep part of your personality, of wanting to learn things and then also wanting to, share that information with more people and to encourage discussions, especially, of course, when you're a Palestinian and you realize how much disinformation there is, especially in the West. This is a motivation to become a journalist. But I learned journalism in Germany. I worked for many years for the public broadcast as an investigative reporter. I never touched on the topic of Palestine and Israel, mostly because we did topics, Germany-related topics. I talked about Palestine in my free time, but not professionally. And then I decided that I wanted to come to Palestine and actually live here. I told you already that my family are all in Israel, and coming here in the summer holidays, doesn't really give you the full picture of what's happening here. So I felt I need to live here, to really have some daily life here for more than a few weeks, and to live under military occupation, to really realize what that means. So I decided to come to the West Bank, but not as a journalist, because I knew how difficult it would be to report to a German audience about Palestine and Israel. Not only difficult, maybe impossible, maybe even destructive for your whole existence. So I decided to do something completely else and to take a break of journalism. And I applied at a political foundation, and this is where I've been working since I came here. Last May, the war started, and I was in between. I was really at many places where the war was so visible. I was in Sheikh Jarrah, I was in Jerusalem when the big clashes happened. And this was the moment where I decided, okay, I'm a journalist. I have a smartphone. I know how to tell stories. I know what's going on. If I don't report now, then really I cannot call myself a journalist, out of fear of maybe at some point losing opportunities. I said no. This was a very decisive moment for me in my career, because I was very successful in Germany and I was working for the public broadcast, something very conservative. I had a lot of prizes. I could have easily just, climbed up the career ladder. And I knew the moment I will, openly talk about the fact that I'm Palestinian and report about what's going on and really naming the things as they are, this is going to have an impact. I knew that. But while witnessing what was going on and seeing the injustice happening in front of me, I felt like this is not anymore a question that I could debate with myself. This is just, I need to do this. And then I started reporting. I started with maybe 500 followers. I was not active on social media before at all. And I got so much feedback within a very short period of time, mainly of young Germans who wrote to me that for the first time they started to understand what's going on. For the first time they got a whole new perspective on what was happening here. And this showed me that there is an interest among the young generation, also in the West. And this also motivated me to continue, despite, of course, all the threats and negative impacts that might come along the way.
As a journalist and Palestinian, do you believe that Western media outlets are biased when it comes to the reporting of the occupation in Palestine?
I don't know if I would say Western media is biased in general. Everyone has his or her biases. First of all, there is a lack of information and of knowledge, also among journalists. I've experienced that, and other people have experienced that, and it's really shocking to see how little journalists who work on that topic here actually know about the realities on the ground. In many cases, it might not be their fault in the first place because the system itself is a bit flawed. For example, the main correspondents of the big German media outlets, they are obliged to live in Tel Aviv. So there couldn't be, a bigger bubble than Tel Aviv when it comes to the Palestinian-Israeli reality. And they are also, the correspondents for the Palestinian territories. But they live in Tel Aviv, which means they do their grocery shopping in Tel Aviv. They go out in Tel Aviv. They have their children in Israeli kindergartens in Tel Aviv. They live the Israeli reality in Tel Aviv and not the Palestinian reality in Masaf Ariata. So this obviously is a problem. And then you could say, well, you're a journalist, so take your bag, take your car, go to Masaf Ariata, go to Hebron, go to Nablus, and do your job. Be in the field, talk to people, stay overnight, be present when the army invades a house at night, Then I do believe that many journalists somehow try to avoid facing the truth, because this would mean that they would have to change their narrative and the way they report. And I do think, and I'm convinced of the fact, that many journalists are afraid to do so. So there is a lot of censorship going on, which is, at least when it comes to German media, not imposed, by the government, but it's mostly self-censorship. Journalists experience that when they report in a certain way, they will have a lot of trouble. They will get a lot of emails, they will have a lot of extra conferences, they will have to write a lot of statements. And then at the end of the day, they think like, well, I'm a German. What do I care about Israelis or Palestinians? This is my career. I'll be here another 2 years. Why should I risk my personal career for those people? So let's rather focus on superficial topics and report about Christmas in Bethlehem or, the Taibi brewery, those light topics. Instead of, killed miners, for example, or school children attacked on their way to school by settlers.
Do you think any of your German journalist colleagues feel afraid or feel like they have to censor themselves because of German history, because they don't want to be labeled as anti-Semitic when it comes to the reporting of the occupation in Palestine?
Of course. The accusation of being an anti-Semite right now is, it's something that's happening a lot in Germany, and it has reached ridiculous outcomes. Some people would call it even anti-Semitic if you spell the term Palestine. If you say Palestine, for some people, this is already anti-Semitic. So this is, of course, absolutely ridiculous. And I think if we start labeling anything related to Palestine as anti-Semitic, this kind of downplays the real threat of anti-Semitism. But it's true that many Germans, not only journalists, are scared of being labeled as anti-Semites, because this is really in Germany something that would kill you and your career. And it should kill your career if it was, based on real grounds, obviously. I think that those people who lose their job often are victims of smear campaigns, and this is how it happens. There are smear campaigns that specifically target people, often in media, who dare to speak up when it comes to the human rights violation of Palestinian human rights. So once the smear campaigns start, in most cases, the bosses would give in and fire people. And I know people who lost their jobs. One girl who had to leave the Deutsche Welle, she's a Palestinian journalist who was working for the Deutsche Welle, which is also part of the public broadcast. She lost her job a few months ago, also under the pretext of being anti-Semitic, and she actually went to court and she sued the Deutsche Welle. And a few days ago, it came out that her being fired was against the law. It had no ground.
Do you feel that you will eventually have to risk your career at some point to report on the events happening here in Palestine in a more authentic way?
Look, I've thought about that a lot. I've completely changed my mindset when it comes to this. Obviously, if you openly talk about Palestine and Israel and report about what's going on here, this means that certain career options are gone for you. Yeah. And there might be a lot of, opportunities I could have taken if I hadn't talked about Palestine and Israel, which I now will not be able to take. But then the big question is, would I even want those opportunities? But I'm very happy, that I don't allow anyone to intimidate me, to scare me off. I'm even more encouraged to speak up, because when you realize that people want to silence you, then as a journalist that there is some work to do, So on the contrary, it's encouraging me.
From a journalistic perspective and as a professional, what do you think would need to happen to secure the freedom of Palestinians? And do you believe that Palestine will be free?
Sometimes when I watch a group of Palestinian protesters, non-violent protesters, for example in Masafir Yatta, going out and demanding their rights, and facing a group of soldiers, heavily armed, so serious, with masks and their guns, I ask myself, who's actually free here? I wouldn't consider Palestinians in general not free, because freedom is not only the freedom of movement, it's also the freedom of your mind, for example. So I also do think that Israelis are not free with this military occupation. I don't envy all those soldiers sitting in their box at 40 degrees, pointing their gun towards the cars passing them. I don't think this is something that is a great thing that you would wish for, neither for yourself nor for your kids. So I don't think that Israelis are free neither. This, I think, is an important point for me. Well, I think that journalism plays a very decisive role, a very, very decisive role, and I think journalists really can have an impact here. I see the feedback on my little Instagram account by people who tell me that their whole mindset has changed just after seeing certain pictures, videos, after having, some information that they haven't had access to before. The experience of Palestine and Israel, I think for everyone, is mind-opening. Once you see how much injustice can happen in 2022 and how little international law, the United Nations, international institutions, NGOs and media can do, you realize that the whole world maybe is a bit of a lost case, because I'm focusing on Palestine and Israel, but I'm very aware of the fact that there is a lot of injustice also happening at other places. Now, at the moment, we are in this situation where people are very intimidated and afraid to speak up. I think this is going to change. I really hope that this is going to change. Palestinians do a lot of the job themselves. Everyone has smartphones, and whenever anything happens, they film and they share that information. And at some point, it's not going to be possible anymore to silence everyone, to shut down all Instagram accounts. So the truth of what's happening here on the ground is more and more coming to the surface. This is about human rights. It's not so much about Palestinians, Israelis, or Jews, this is about human rights. Human rights are for everyone. I guess if I wouldn't have hope that there might be some positive development, I wouldn't do what I do. I mean, if this was a lost case anyway, I would just live my life in Germany, have my career, and say whatever. Obviously, I do think that positive change is possible. I really hope that Palestinians, after so many decades, will have the chance to live in dignity and freedom. And I hope that this all happens before I die, because I think that, as a young, if I'm happy enough to become an old woman, I would like to see some kind of positive change.